Okay, so in the meanwhile, I'll start with the introduction for Ajay sir. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm glad to present to you Dr. Ajei Gopal. Dr. Ajei Gopal is one of the distinguished alumnus of IIT Bombay. Dr. Ajei Gopal is the president and CEO of Ansys Incorporated, Pennsylvania, US. He obtained his B.Tech degree in mechanical engineering from IIT Bombay in 1982. His Ph.D. degree in computer science from Cornell University. Dr. Gopal began his career initially as a researcher with Bell Communications Research and later joined IBM Research, where he became a founding member and chief technology officer of IBM's Pervasive Computing division. In 2000, he co founded and served as CEO of ReefEdge Networks, a provider of managed and secure wireless LAN systems, which was sold to Symantec Corporation, the leader in cybersecurity software and services. In 2004, he served as CTO and Executive Vice President at Symantec before moving to CA Technologies, where he was Executive Vice President and General Manager of Products, and later to HP, where he was Senior Vice President and General Manager at HP Software. He has been an independent director of Citrix Systems Incorporated since September 2017 and a director of Ansys since February 2011. During Dr. Gopal's first 18 months as CEO of engineering simulation leader Ansys, the value of company doubled, increasing its market capitalization by more than $8 billion. It's a pleasure to welcome him here today, and without further ado, I would like to give the stage to him.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. So, for all of you who are listening to this session, and for all of your colleagues, the world in which you're going to graduate into is quite profoundly different from the world into which I graduated. Right now, we're dealing with a pandemic, obviously. There is a recession as a result of the pandemic. We're seeing global trade disputes. Here in the US, we're seeing broad discussions about civil rights. All of these disruptions individually bring and create risks and opportunities, and taken together, it is quite a profoundly different world today than I think it was certainly at the time that I graduated. And it's going to be different in the next 10 years, and it's going to be different in the next 20 years. And what, for me, when I graduated from IIT in 1982, which was obviously a lifetime ago, my experience at IIT Bombay was foundational for my success. It helped me navigate through all of the twists and turns that I was facing in the industry, that I was facing in the broader world. And frankly, whether it was in the classroom or whether it was in the hostel, whether it was hiking in the Sayadris, I made a number of lifelong friends, and I learned some critical lessons that I think have set a foundation for my career and any success that I might have had in my own life. So from a career perspective, as Sanjay said, I started as a mechanical engineer. I switched to computer science for my PhD, and I began my career in research. And I had an opportunity to move into the startup world, founding a company. I was a general manager in large organizations for a while, and then I stepped away from the world of technology per se and moved into private equity. And I worked for a company in the private equity space for a few years. And then I stepped back in to become the CEO of Ansys. I've worked in a startup company, I've founded a startup company, I've worked in mid-sized companies, and I've worked in larger enterprises. And Ansys, of course, I'm sure many of you know, we're the leader in engineering simulation software. The company today is worldwide. We have customers around the world. And frankly, whatever the product that you're using, in all likelihood, the vendor of that product use Ansys technology or some of our products to be able to build that offering. So we're very proud of what we do. We affect people's lives around the world. We're a multinational corporation. And I really didn't plan my career to get here. So I don't have a master plan of how to become the CEO of a multinational company. It just happened. So I don't really have any advice that I think could be actionable on a day one basis for how you can become a CEO of a public company. It really depends on who you are. It depends on the choices you make. It depends on how you live your lives. It depends on what your objectives are. But what I thought I would do is to share some general thoughts and then I could take some questions. Now, until this point, for most of you, the objectives are very clear. You're following an established, straightforward path to academic success. As I said, I came from a middle-class family. My father worked. My father was an officer in the Indian Navy. My mother was a teacher, and the focus in the family was in education. And it was very clear. And even as a young kid, I can remember my grandmother telling me. My grandmother, who was obviously had not formally gone to school beyond a particular level. My grandmother telling me that her expectation was that I would graduate with a Ph.D. That was the expectation. It was very clear. It was all about academic success. But the further you get from school, the more the rules change, your objectives change. And there frankly is no template, there's no one size fits all. And you've got to understand what's important to you. These criteria of success will change. In some cases, you're going to make decisions about family. You're going to make decisions about being with loved ones. You're going to make decisions about children. You're going to make decisions maybe about the environment in which you want to live. And it's important to understand what's important to you, and then to make the changes that you believe are appropriate to achieving the goals that are important to you. And what's important to you may not be important to your friends. It may not be important to other people in your family, and you have to really understand what's important to you. And so, one of the lessons that I've learned is you really have to do what you're interested in. You've got to focus in your career on the activities that will motivate you, on the jobs that are important to you. And if you don't know what's important for you right now, and you have a choice of 2 different opportunities, think 2 jobs ahead. Or think 3 jobs ahead. Where do you want to be? Which of these will help you get there? Will you be happy there? Now, I've heard a number of people tell me that they're interested in taking a job because it pays more money, but they're not that excited about it. And in some cases, I've heard people telling me that, look, I want to pursue a particular career in an area because even though it's not very interesting, because I'll make a lot of money and then I can go off and do what I really want to do. And in my opinion, that's not a recipe for success in life. You have to find that alchemy of talent, of passion, and of course, money. And in the aggregate, that'll help you find the success that you seek. And I'll give you one example in my own family. My son, my oldest son, who has a degree in business, his interest and his desire for a number of years was to go into private equity, into finance. And then one day he came to me and he said, listen, I've decided I'm not going to pursue that. This was when he was in his 3rd year in college. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to take a job in private equity. I'm going to go into the music business. So he started his own business while he was in college. And then he did this for a couple of years. And then he got a really interesting idea for a tech company in the music space, and now he's the CEO and the founder of a company that's doing reasonably well. He works all the time, and he would have worked all the time if he had gone down in finance as well. But now he's having a really good time. He's enjoying himself, and if he's successful at something that he cares about, and he makes an impact in a world that he really values and that he enjoys. And I think that's the kind of thing that is important. And frankly, that's the advice that I've followed in my own career. And I've made decisions where I've focused on things that were interesting and important to me, not just because of money. The other piece of advice is focus on your deficiencies. So earlier in your career, you have to take an honest look at yourself and really try to understand your strengths and weaknesses. And you've got to embrace those areas for improvement and act upon them. So in my own particular case, when I started off, I was a horrible public speaker. I used to get petrified speaking in public. It was problematic. I could never speak in front of a group of people. So I intentionally learned how to speak in public. And today I have no trouble speaking in public. And that turns out, and I had no idea it would be an important skill, but it turns out that in my job, I spent on a number of occasions a week, I end up by speaking to groups of people. And if I had that fear of public speaking, it would be impossible for me to do my job. And that's something that I specifically worked on. But paradoxically, as your career advances, you're in a position to hire other people who can offset areas where you need to improve. And you don't, and at that point, as your career starts to advance, at that point, you should start to focus on the areas of your strength and hire people to offset the areas where you're not as strong. And that changes as you advance in your career. The other thing is you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. For your career to develop, you have to put yourself into uncomfortable positions. You have to put yourself in a position where you have to learn something new, where you have to learn to adapt. And in my own case, to give you an example, when I left as being a technology executive and took a job in private equity, I went from running an organization with thousands of people reporting to me, with hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue around the world, with a packed calendar, to a situation where I had 0 people reporting to me, to a brand new industry where I had to make my own agenda, make my own calendar. And I had a great time doing that. It was an extremely challenging environment because essentially it was a shift of my career. But today I am a better CEO because I went into something that I thought would be interesting, but put me into a position where I was quite uncomfortable. And so you have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. The next lesson is you should always keep learning, especially when you're in difficult situations. And what you learn at your B.Tech level or M.Tech or whatever degree you end up with, MBA, whatever you learn, that is the details of what you learn will no longer be relevant in a few years from now. It's important. It'll help you get your first job. It'll help you start your career. But everything that you learn will be outdated with new technologies, with new techniques, with new understanding. What's far more important is to learn how to learn. It's to learn how to question, how to reason, because there is never a right way to do something. In business, when you make a decision or when I make a decision at work, there's no validation as to whether that's the right answer or the wrong answer. You have a choice of doing one thing or another. You do one thing. That's the universe in which you live. There's no control against which you can validate whether that was the right thing or not. And so you have to learn to be able to make decisions in the context of incomplete information. You have to learn how to make decisions. And that's the most important thing. And those are skills that you can get from an institution like IIT, and those are the skills that set you up for a lifetime of success. The other thing is that no matter how challenging the situation that you might be in, even if you don't like what you're doing, treat it as a learning experience and take away from that the positives that will help you in other experiences. And in my own case, and I don't want to specifically mention the name of the company, in my own case, I found myself in a pretty unpleasant situation at one point in my career. And rather than just simply walk away, and I had plenty of opportunity to walk away, I worked through it. And for me, that was a tremendous learning experience because I came out of it with a better understanding of how to deal with those kinds of situations. And that has made me a better executive today than it was before. So those are important aspects. I think another very important thing which many people may not necessarily recognize is that is the concept of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, and some people call it EQ. EQ is as important or perhaps even more important than IQ. Obviously, what you know is important, and you have to have the facts and you have to know what you're doing. But how you treat people on your journey is even more important. Now, I'm a CEO for a global company. I work with people with different nationalities, different cultures, different backgrounds, different beliefs. And my success as an executive depends on my being able to understand what's important to other people. To being able to motivate them, to be able to recognize how to work with them. And as you go out and work in the industry, and you'll be working with people that you recognize you work with for many years, and you'll work with people who come from completely different backgrounds. And it's really how you empathize with people. It's how you communicate with them. Listen more than you speak. That's important. Learning how to bring people along, right? Understanding the diversity and the value that other people bring, that's really profoundly important. And that will bring you even more success than knowing a particular set of facts. And I'll give you an example about bringing people along from my own career. So at one point in my career, I took a job. I mean, I moved to a different part of the organization. So my office was in a large open space, at the edge of a large open space. And there were a number of people sitting in that open space, and I would just walk by them to get to my desk, to get to my office. And about a year later, my assistant told me that, she said, a lot of people here don't like you. I said, well, why is that? It seems somewhat harsh. I haven't spoken to anyone. And she said, that's exactly why they don't like you. They weren't part of my department, but they didn't like me because I just didn't say hello. I didn't smile. I went straight to my office and I sat down and got on with my work. And it actually taught me an interesting lesson, which was it doesn't take you a moment to stop and say hello to someone, to greet someone, to say and to make that connection. And that human connection is really important, because later on, when you need something and when you want an individual to do something, how you interact with them is going to be very important, and they'll remember that. And so that's a trivial example, but that's one perspective as you think about emotional intelligence and your ability to work especially in a large multinational corporation, or to work with clients from around the world. Your ability to connect with them is going to be important. And so that I think is an important skill. And frankly, it's a skill that many people don't have. And as engineers, it's not a skill that naturally comes to you. It's not a skill that you think about. If you're in sales, it's something that you have to develop to be successful. But for a lot of engineers, it doesn't come naturally. And then finally, I think the point I want to leave you with before I can open it up for questions is you really have to recognize the world and the opportunities as they are presented to you. And I talked a little bit about how COVID is changing the world and how people will think differently. Well, just think about it. Think about what we've gone through with the shutdown. I know IIT Bombay is shut down for classes and they're going to be virtual classes next semester. Think about how impactful that's been. In a time of change like this, when we go through major sort of trauma, if you will, because the society is going through trauma right now. When we go through major trauma, that ushers in change and that accelerates change. And so what might have taken 10 years to happen in society is going to happen in a year. And it's important now, when you are all graduating, you're going to be graduating in the world, as I said earlier, which has been impacted by COVID. People are going to be working from home. The supply chains are going to be, there's trade wars, the supply chains are going to be disrupted. All of these things represent opportunities. These are markets that are going to be disrupted, and there are opportunities. So with the global disruption in supply chains, that's going to be an opportunity. So can you address it? What could you do? What are the skills that you could bring to help address a problem that's going to happen? This is not a problem perhaps that may have been as important last year, but next year it's going to be really important. Technology and tools are constantly advancing. Can you take advantage of them? I'll give you one example of one of a company that I talk about quite often. Is a company called Relativity. Relativity is a customer of Ansys. This is a company founded by two young guys, probably both not yet 30. So one was I think they were both out of USC. One worked for Blue Origin and the other worked for SpaceX, and they got together and they decided to build a company. And their vision was to build a company where you could launch a payload into space at a much lower cost than anyone else. And that was their objective. How do I launch payload into space at a much lower cost? And what they decided to do was they decided to use additive manufacturing to print a rocket. And that has some advantages, and we don't need to talk about it right now, but that has some advantages about creating a much less expensive rocket, so you can have a much less expensive way of launching payload into space, even though it would be a single-use rocket, as opposed to SpaceX, which obviously has more expensive but reusable rockets. So that's the direction that they were trying to go. And of course, when they started, they realized that there wasn't an additive manufacturing facility. There wasn't a 3D printer big enough to be able to print the first rocket that they wanted. So as a starting point, they went ahead and they built the world's largest 3D printer. And then they used that to build a rocket. And it took them 18 months from starting the company to getting a rocket on a test bed at NASA to validate that the engine could actually work. That is a tremendous 18 months, right, to go from nothing to building a next generation engine. And that is a tremendous feat of accomplishment, tremendous accomplishment. And that's because the technology and the tools are constantly advancing. It is easier today to build a company. It is easier today to come up with ideas and to take advantage of them. It is easier today to have an impact than ever before. And that's, again, an opportunity for all of you. The environment, people's attitudes about the environment are changing. Obviously, with the pandemic, you're seeing a reduction in production. You're seeing greener skies or bluer skies. Hopefully, not greener skies. You're seeing bluer skies. You're seeing cleaner water. What could you? How can you make a difference in that world? And then the final point I want to make is companies. Ansys is no exception. All of us are working from home. We're all working very effectively from home, but the process by which we're running our businesses has changed. Whereas previously we relied on people going into each other's offices, there was paper, etc. Companies are now embracing a digital transformation. And whether it's running your office on a day-to-day basis, whether it's building your products, whether it's thinking about servicing your customers, companies are completely changing into digital-based companies. And that digital transformation is accelerating. Those are opportunities. What can you do to accelerate that, to enable that? And so the reason I go through these cases or these potential disruptions in the market is not because I'm advocating that any of you go out and start a company in those spaces or to address those challenges. But what I'm pointing out is that there's lots of opportunities. And so whether you want to go start your own company, or whether you want to go join a company that's addressing this, or whether you want to think about, studying more to build up your skills so that you can start to make a difference, there is enormous amount of opportunity ahead of all of you because of what's taking place in the industry. So let me stop at this point. What I've tried to do is to give you some perspective of some of the habits that I've learned over the years in my career. My path is not going to be the same as your path. No two people are going to follow the same path. But some of the basic principles I think are applicable more broadly. And I think for all of you, even though things look difficult right now and you're graduating at a time of significant disruption, recognize that with disruption comes opportunity. And with that opportunity and with the skills and the capabilities that you have, with that opportunity comes the ability to truly make a difference in the world. So with that, I'll pause and potentially open it up to questions.
Thank you so much for the talk, sir. So we'll start with the question. So we received one question, and I think it's a very important question. So as you mentioned that this is an ever-changing world. So how do we deal with the paradox of choice? We have a lot of opportunities, lot of career options, like a number of things we want to do. So how do we resort to one thing at a time or approach our interests?
Well, I think, as I said before, there's no control. If you have a choice, you're going to take a choice, and that choice is going to be the universe in which you live. You can't go back and revisit the choices. So you have to ultimately have conviction around a choice. The choice, you should not, in my opinion, you should not pick any one metric along which to optimize. It isn't just about money. And a lot of people go down that path and say, listen, I want to go and make a lot of money in this job, even though it's going to be a horrible job. I don't like it, but at least I get paid a lot of money. That, in my mind, is while it may be short-term, from optimizing for the short term, in the long term, it's going to be a failure because you're not going to enjoy what you do. Look ahead, look multiple steps ahead and say, where do I want to end up in 5 years from now? Where do I want to end up 2 or 3 jobs from now? And then think about whether this job is going to give you the skills to be able to get to that job that you're looking for, right? So if you want to, for example, let me take a simple example. Let's assume you want to become a manager, you're an engineer right now, and you're in an organization, you want to become a manager, and you're thinking about the next job, and you want to become a general manager running a business. Well, if you just keep growing up in engineering, you have one set of experiences. But as a general manager, you're managing people in sales, you're managing people in engineering, you're managing people in finance. So how do you think about broadening your sets of experiences? So maybe you want to advocate for yourself for a job where you step out of engineering for a while and you spend some time working with customers. And maybe that's a good direction for you to go. Or maybe you really want to change industries. So you think about the path that you go to. So I think you have to think longer term, multi-stats ahead, and don't try to optimize for the next job.
Okay. So we have one more question. So Mrigi asks us, do you still use any of your technical knowledge in CS or mechanical in your business as usual day to day as an executive?
I don't. I'm not sitting there solving partial differential equations, right? I don't do that anymore. It's been a while. It's been a while since I've done that, and I'm not writing software. It's been a while since I did that. There was a time in my career when I could stay up for 2 days in a row, just write code, and I did. But that's not what I do right now. My job right now is to run a business. But it's a technology business, and my customers are some of the most technical in the world. We have 4,500 people around the world. Some of them are I would say about 1,000 PhDs in the organization. So it's a very technical organization. So yes, I participate in technical discussions. I provide guidance to my company, but I'm surrounded by people, thankfully, who know much more about me much more than I do about any particular subject. You pick the subject, there's someone in the company who knows significantly more than I do. And so my goal now as a CEO is not to be mired in the technical details of any one thing, but it's to understand the technology well enough to be able to drive the strategy of the company. My job is driving strategy. My job is making decisions about who and how to hire at the executive level. My job is to work with my board of directors, and my job is to work with my shareholders. So it's a broad view of stakeholder management. But setting strategy is an important aspect of that job. And I have to understand the technology well enough and be well versed in the technology to be able to drive that job. And that's what makes it more difficult, especially for a company like Ansys. If you don't have a technical background, it's more difficult to be a leader in this company because you don't understand the products, you don't understand the technologies. You don't understand exactly why it's complex to be able to solve CFD. Why is that a complex situation? Why is that a complex problem domain? That is something that I understand because of the training that I've had.
Thank you for answering that, sir. We have one more question by Anirudh. So, one sec. So, what was your 10-year plan after graduation? Did you plan to be in academia considering you have pursued a PhD? How tough was it to change your stream after being a mechanical engineer to a researcher in computer science, especially when you are in a university like Cornell?
So the path that I followed was I was an undergraduate in mechanical engineering, and I did not particularly feel like mechanical was, and I didn't really know what I was getting into until, well, at the time, IIT was 5 years. So after 2 years, you had an opportunity to change, but I really didn't know anything about mechanical engineering at the time. And so I took my first computer science class in my third year, first semester, and the department was third, fourth, and fifth year. So third year, first semester, I took my first computer science class, and I loved it. I said, this is what I want to do. It was all, by the time it was too late to change disciplines. There was no computer science discipline at the time. It was just mechanical and electrical. If I wanted, and electrical had more computer science classes. So what I did instead was I worked with, I took as many computer science classes as I could, and there were a handful. But my bachelor's project, my B.Tech project, I worked with someone outside of IIT on computer-controlled machinery, computer-controlled milling machines, and so that was my introduction. I wrote a lot of software, and I applied to the US for graduate work, and switched to computer science. Now it was a difficult transition because many of my classmates in computer science had undergraduate degrees in computer science, so they had a full curriculum behind them. So I had to just work a little bit harder to begin with, and that was involved. When I took the position, when I joined computer science for my graduate work, I became a computer scientist because I enjoyed it. Right, it was fun for me. I really had more fun writing software, frankly, than doing other, than solving partial differential equations. And so that's it. I knew I wanted to be in software, so that's what I did. And I didn't specifically think about being in academia. When I graduated with my PhD, I looked at academia. I had offers to be a professor, but I realized that one thing you have to be a professor is you have to enjoy teaching. And I really don't particularly enjoy teaching. And I'm a pretty rotten teacher. In the one semester that I taught, I was a really bad teacher. So it was clear to me that being a teacher was not a good outcome for anyone, certainly not for me. So I ended up by, I said I wanted to be in research. And so that's where I started. At the time, if you had asked me what was my goal going to be, my response to you would have been, I'm going to be in research for the rest of my career. I was very comfortable writing papers, going to conferences, presenting the results, doing sort of research work, doing long-term technical exploration, and that would have been my career. That is obviously not what I'm doing right now. But as I said, your goals shift and your objectives shift over time as you learn more about yourself and the industry.
Okay. So we have next question. I think a lot of people have asked this question. So you did mention you lacked at public speaking, and you did also mention that you somehow got better at it. So a lot of people have been asking, how did you get better at public speaking?
Well, it's actually not that difficult. And it's exactly the same thing as anything. How do you get better at, I don't know, playing chess? How do you get better at running a race? You practice, right? So what makes you better is doing it. And I would strongly recommend that if you're uncomfortable speaking in public, speak in public, right? That's what you should do. What you need to do and speak in public when the stakes are not so high. The first time you speak shouldn't be in a big event in front of 1,000 people. The first time you speak in public can be in a smaller group. If you want to, and I don't know if IIT has a group like this, but certainly some universities have organizations where the kids get together, where the students get together and take turns in presenting on a particular subject to each other and provide criticism and improvement. And you can you can certainly get formally trained on how to speak in front of an audience, and there is training available. But the most important thing besides practice is preparation. And what you have to do when you stand up on stage is to recognize, in general, there's an audience in front of you, and they're listening to you. They're there because they want to learn from you, and you have to prepare to make sure that you know what you want to say. And once you're well prepared, you have an advantage over the audience. You know what you want to say. You know what the message is. You know your material better than they do. So be confident and speak from confidence. And it works out. The first time will be really difficult. You'll feel horrible. The second time will be better, and the third time will be better than that. And the nice thing about having a camera on your phone is you can record it and you can watch yourself. And believe me, the first time you watch yourself speaking, you'll sound much worse than you thought you actually sounded. But it'll get better and it'll get better. And so that's what I would recommend. Practice, get together with other people, criticize each other, because that's a really important skill. Learning how to present and learning how to get your ideas across in a short period of time is a very important skill in the workplace. When you're in your first job and you're talking to your manager and you're presenting some activity, the manager doesn't want to listen to 45 minutes of preamble. You want to really understand how to get the message across to the audience. So I think that that's a very important skill that is worth developing. And if you don't have a club on campus to do that, that's something that one of you should consider starting.
Great. So one small announcement before we proceed. We have a feedback form. Roshni has shared it on all participants. We encourage you to fill that. Proceeding with the questions. So a lot of people have been asking, like, you transitioned from a academic maybe side career to a management and basically a technological leadership role. So how difficult was the change, and how did you come about solving the problems you faced?
It is a difficult change to move from a research world into more of a commercial world. And some people don't make the change. Some people don't make the change. Some people actually can make the change very successfully. And there are many, many examples of extremely successful people who've started off in research and have built businesses and have built careers either as serial entrepreneurs, even while they're professors, starting companies on the side and selling them, or building large companies that have been maintained. So it's not an unusual path. They require different things. And when you're in academia or when you're in research, your focus is on writing papers, your focus is on impacting the community through publications, maybe through patents, doing very advanced work. When you're running a company or when you're running an organization or when you're thinking about business, you have to really take a slightly different perspective and not focus uniquely on the technology, but focus on what the outcome looks like. And the one path that I think is the one place where people trip up is, as a technologist or as a researcher, you focus on the technology and you try to come up with a better way of doing, you try to come up with a better toolkit, with a better set of capabilities, with a better offering, whatever it is. As running a business, you have to start from the other way around. You have to start with what the market is looking for. And this is a failing of a lot of people who make that transition. They focus on the technology and not what the customer is looking for. To be successful in building a product or to run a business which is a product business, and I've been a product guy for my whole life, I'm not been a services guy. To be in the product business, you have to understand what customers want, what customers will pay for. Not necessarily what they tell you they want, because what they tell you they want might change over time. But you have to understand what they really want, and most importantly, what they will pay money for, and how much it's going to cost you to produce what they're going to pay money for, and is there money to be made in that transaction. And once you understand that, and once you understand the business model and the needs, etc., that'll help you build a business, or that'll help you think about the evolution of your business. People coming from a technology perspective focus on the technology and don't think that way. So you have to be able to change your mindset. Once you do that, and it's not that hard to do, once you do that, you will have an advantage over people who are not technologists, because you understand the technology. Someone who doesn't have a technical background, they're thinking in abstraction. If you understand the technology and you understand what customers are looking for, that's when you really have the opportunity to make a huge difference in the marketplace.
Thank you for answering that, sir. We have a question. Is an MBA necessary for taking a managerial role, like technological or managerial role?
No, I don't have an MBA, and I certainly have a management role. It isn't necessary. Certainly MBAs give you skills, but it's important to recognize that one of the key elements of an MBA is not necessarily just the skills, but it's also the networking. If you go to a really prestigious institution, then you will meet other people there who are also going to be successful in their careers, and that gives you a network on which to rely as you move forward in your own career. It also gives you a shortcut to understand finance, to understand marketing, to understand leadership, and a good MBA will teach you a lot of things that you will pick up over the years. So as I reflect on my own career, if I had had an MBA, I would have had a shortcut to learning many of the things that I've learned over the years, but it would have just been taught to me in a very focused way, which would have been frankly easier for me to consume than the way that I did. Because anything that I've learned about business, it's been self-taught. My only educational credentials are technical. I mean, degrees in mechanical engineering and computer science. I don't have a degree in business, but I don't practice those. I'm not a practicing computer scientist or a practicing engineer. I work in a company where the skills that are required of me are business skills. And so over time, I've picked up financial skills and marketing skills, etc. But an MBA gives you an opportunity to learn those in a very concentrated way. The question, though, is how do you apply those skills? And is the institution to which you're going to give you more than just simply access to books, which you could read on your own? Are they going to give you access to a network of people? And that's why I would think long and hard about an MBA. Any MBA is not a good thing. A good MBA, in my opinion, is a good thing, but you don't even need a good MBA to be successful in your career. Just like you don't need a PhD to be successful in your career. Your career is based on many, many different things. Education is one aspect of that.
Thank you for answering that, sir. We have one more question. So, how did you develop skills to solve problems which are generally faced by a leader in technology? So, also one more thing. What skills do you think are necessary for a person who is like a leader in technology?
Well, it depends on what you mean by leader. If by leader you mean you're in a position where you have responsibility over other people, right? You're managing a team of people, for example, or you're leading a team of people, then I think it's really important to understand how to lead people. And leadership and motivating people and getting an organization to come along with you is not obvious. You have to really think about leadership styles and what your style is, what the style of the individual is, and it's not something that is intuitively obvious overnight. It's something that you have to really think about. And frankly, doing some reading gives you a perspective on terms of leadership styles. And there are plenty of business books out there, and I would recommend that if you're interested, you spend a little bit of time and look out for whatever is most convenient. It doesn't have to. In business, there are a number of principles that people repeat in book after book after book, and so you don't have to read a particular book, but you just have to understand the principles. And those principles, some of them are pretty universal and are helpful to understand. But it's very important to read a book about leadership and to understand what the tools are that you need to develop. Part of that is being introspective to understand your own strengths and weaknesses. And then part of that is understanding the individual that you're dealing with. And I'll give you a very specific example of just one way of thinking about an interaction. Let's assume you're a manager and you're trying to work with one of your team members, and you have to think about what you're asking them against their capabilities. Then there's something called the skill world matrix. Are they willing or unwilling to do the job that you think needs to be done? Are they willing or unwilling? Are they able or unable? And depending on where that individual fits on that 2x2 matrix, you have to change your style of interaction with them. If they're able to do the job but unwilling, you have to sell them on the importance of that. If they are willing to do the job but unable, you have to show them how to do that. If they're willing to do the job and they're able to do the job, you have to delegate. If they're unwilling and unable, then perhaps you have a real problem and you need to think about potentially getting someone else in or making a change. And that's a very simple example that I'm giving you of how to think about it. But these are all shorthands that certainly I've developed over the years as I get into situations, and it's just second nature in terms of thinking about how to work with someone or to work with a group of people. And some of this comes from experience, and some of this comes from learning, some of this comes from watching. I have the benefit of having been a manager or a leader in large organizations for many years, and as a result of that, these are natural to me. But learning how to motivate people, especially, as I said, in a multinational corporation, or learning how to work with customers or team members who might be remote, who might be in different parts of the world, all of those things require skills. And that's why I made the comment that I did about emotional intelligence and EQ. Learning how to work with people, what motivates them, what's important for them, and factoring that into your conversations is important. And it's not only what you know, it's how you work with people. And that allows one to be a more successful leader. And some of the people from whom I've learned have been charismatic leaders who have helped me and in my career, certainly watching them, but also watching how they interact on stage, watching how they talk to people, how they think about scenarios. And so that's the other aspect. When you're in a situation where, say, you're working, find somebody that you think could be a mentor. They could be an informal mentor, but reach out to someone and say, hey, listen, would you mind spending a little bit of time with me outside of the normal management structure? Because I'd like to get your advice. I like the way that you're thinking, that you're running your business. I'd like to learn from that. I'd like to do, and those are useful things, because most people are very happy to be in a mentor relationship with someone else in the organization. So start to use the tools that are informal tools that are available to you, not just the formal tools, to be able to try to develop these skills.
So a lot of people have been asking for book recommendations, like general books.
I'll send you a couple of recommendations via email, and maybe you can share that.
Okay, that's great, sir. So one more question we have, and I think it's a very general question. Do you think leadership is a skill which is inherent in people, or can it be developed?
It's developed. It is there in my mind. Leadership skills can be developed. I don't necessarily think of myself as being a today as a leader. I am very different than I was 10 years ago. That I'm different, and I'm different from the way that I was 10 years ago, 10 years prior to that. And I'm the same person. I'm maybe a little bit older, maybe a little bit slower, but I'm the same person. But what's changed is the experiences that I've had, and it's the ability to improve myself, and the willingness to try to become a better person and to learn to become a better leader. So as long as your mind is open, you're learning all the time, you're viewing, you're challenging yourself, you're taking on new responsibilities, you're trying to put yourself in positions where you're uncomfortable, all of the things that I talked about earlier. As you start to go through all of those, you'll experience different things, and those will all make you a better leader. This will make you a better they will give you better instincts. So as far as leadership is concerned, I think it's a misnomer to believe that there are some people who are born to be leaders and there's some people who are not born to be leaders. That's simply not the case. It doesn't work that way. People step up and people show leadership in some cases where you'll see leadership from unexpected places in the organization. Remember, leadership is not about titles. Right. Just because I have a particular title, if I'm a VP of something or a director of something, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a leader. The leader in an organization might be someone who is able to step up and show and exhibit the properties that are necessary at that particular time. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. I mean, if let's imagine that I was running an airline. If I were the head of an airline and I'm in an airplane, the leader of the airplane is not the head of the airline, but it's his employee who's the pilot, right? The pilot is responsible for that flight. And if the pilot says, do this, everyone's going to do exactly what the pilot says. Because in that particular situation, the notion of leadership, it's contextual. It's who is the right person to exhibit the leadership? Who is the right person to lead the organization at that particular time? You're in a plane, the plane's flying, it requires attention. It's the pilot. That's the most qualified. That's the person in the right place. And everyone has to listen to that individual. When you think about leadership styles, the old leadership style that a lot of people may be familiar with, which is sort of a more command and control structure, which is you're sitting in a room, the teacher walks in and says, do this, and you do because the teacher is sitting there and is the authority figure. The manager tells you do this and you do it because the manager is the authority figure. The captain tells you in the army and you do it because the captain is the authority figure. That is no longer the case. And leadership is not no more about command and control. Leadership, there are so many different styles of leadership, and there are books about this. There's so many different styles of leadership. But the most important style is really leadership that comes from who you are, right? It's not about who you know, it's not about your position, but it's about who you are. And it's the attributes that you've developed, it's what you bring to the job that establishes you as a leader. So in times of crisis, when you're working with a company, for example, and there's a product crisis, they're not going to turn to the manager. They're going to turn to the person who is the product expert to go fix it. I remember in my career once, many years ago, when I was in IBM, we were working, and I was in IBM Research, and I was working with one of the development divisions to try to help them bring a product to market. Deadline time, things were behind schedule. We were all at night, late night, in the office in San Jose, in California, and the manager was there. The manager was non-technical. He had nothing to contribute, and all he would do was go out and get food for everyone. And so I thought it was he could have gone home because he wasn't the technical guy, but what he wanted to do was to be with his team, which I thought was really important. And he said, look, let me go get food for everyone because you guys are working and I'm going to do the right thing. And so people take on different roles at different times. It doesn't make you any less as a leader if you're trying to support other people in your organization and pushing them forward because they happen to be the people who are necessary at that particular point. So it's a complex model, and you have to have a mental structure to think about all this stuff.
Thank you for answering that, sir. So we have two similar questions. So What other good habits that you have developed during your career progression along these years have helped you to reach where you are today? For example, let's say exercising, meditation, reading books, etc.
Um, so I do work out. I do exercise, and I do keep time for myself, because at the end of the day, um, you're not going to be as successful at work if you're sick, right? And so you have to look after yourself. I used to run marathons when I was in my 20s. When I was in IIT, I used to when I was in IIT, we had a mountaineering club, and I know it was shut down subsequent to my departure. When I was there, we didn't really have any catastrophic accidents, but I know that there were some subsequent to that. And so that's what I used to do in IIT, was mountaineering and rock climbing. And then subsequently, when I left, I used to run. And then now I ride a bike, I work out. So I think it's very important to be active. And if you're not active, if you let go of your health, and it's just really problematic for you and frankly for your family. So I think that's important. I think it's important to read. I think any good leader, or any individual has to have a broad set of inputs, and you have to go out and collect information. You have to read what you agree with, what you don't agree with. You have to be, so I read a lot, and I'm up to date on a number of different things, and I read books. But I think to the point about meditation, I don't sit down and specifically, I don't have like 30 minutes of meditation every day, but I do try to enjoy time by myself, and so it's a form of meditation, but not in any structured or formal way. But I think one of the important skills that I'll add to, and I've mentioned a number of skills, but one of the important skills that I'll add to is the notion of being able to compartmentalize. So what do I mean by compartmentalization? When no matter how challenging the day, and sometimes I have very challenging days when there's a lot of things going on. And my days, I get pulled into different conversations. In one area, it's sometimes I'm talking with board members, sometimes I'm talking to investors, sometimes I'm talking to employees, sometimes I'm talking to customers. Some are good conversations, some are not so good conversations, some are future conversations, some are conversations about what's happened in the past. There's a lot of context switching going on. And every time you come into a meeting, the person in the meeting has no idea what you've been through, what your day's been like. Your day could have been great, your day could have been rotten, right? They have no idea what it's going to be like. When you come home to your family, your kids have no idea what your day's been like. And you have to be able to compartmentalize, which means you have to be able to take everything that happened to that point, you have to put it behind you, and you have to restart for the next event. And the next event has got to be the most important thing for you to deal with, and then you can move on. And for me, I actually create a metaphor for myself. So and I've practiced this over the years. I imagine a box, and before I go into or start a new thing, I imagine taking whatever I'm thinking about. If I'm thinking about a problem, or if something that happened that I'm very upset about, or whatever, I imagine taking that and putting it in a box, closing the lid of the box and putting it to one side. And I explicitly have in my mind closing the box and putting it to one side. And then I restart, and then I go back to the next meeting. So even if I'm going from a meeting which is contentious into another meeting which is quite the opposite, or I go from a meeting which is not contentious into one that's contentious, I'm ready for the meeting that's appropriate, because I've effectively reset. And so over the years, I've trained myself to compartmentalize. And by the way, that also means I sleep really well at night, because when I go to bed, I'm able to do exactly the same thing. And whatever I'm thinking about, and I know some people will say they stay up at night thinking and tossing and turning. I sleep like a baby, and I sleep like a baby because, well, babies don't sleep so well sometimes. I sleep like a very well-fed baby for a short period of time. I sleep the whole night, and I do this because I'm able to before I go to sleep, I just focus on compartmentalizing and focus on essentially calming myself down, and I go to sleep. So I think all of these things are important. What I do may not be relevant for what you do. You may do things in a different way. But this is important, and being able to context switch, separating work and family is very important. Certainly when you have children later on, your children have especially when your kids are younger, they have no idea what you do. They have no idea of the pressures that you're dealing with. And the most important thing that they want you to be is present when you're with them. And if you're not physically present, but emotionally and mentally present, and if you're physically present and emotionally distant, or you're thinking about what's happening at work, it really creates tension in the minds of the children that isn't helpful for them, and it isn't helpful for you. And that's, at the end of the day, what are you working for? What is your career for? It's family. It's those are the things that are really important. And so, how do you think about being able to move from one context, from one world to another, compartmentalize, context switch? Those are going to be very important skills as well.
I think compartmentalization is a very good skill to have. So I think we have a very good question here. So like for us people who consider you a very successful person, what's your definition of success?
Success, and I try to address this in my comments. I don't think that there's any one size fits all for success. It isn't a matter of I can't expect what I have done to be success for you, right? I appreciate that you think that. And I'm flattered that you think that I've been successful. But I don't feel any different from the guy that I was when I graduated from IIT in 1982, right? To me, I'm still the same person. I really am the same person. I don't feel any different. I don't feel like I'm a success now and I wasn't a success then. That's not how I feel. What I am most proud of is my family, my kids. I've been married for 31 years just last week. So I've been married for 31 years. I've got two boys. My boys are great kids. My wife and I have a great relationship. I'm close to my sibling, my brother. She's close to her brother, and that to me is the most important thing. And it's not whether I had my current job or not, whether I had more money or less money, whether I had a bigger job or a smaller job. That would be less important than this other aspect of what's a family. And so I think all of us have to pick. You have to pick ultimately what your own metrics of success are. Is it money? Is it status? Is it power? Is it family? Is it accomplishments? Is it changing the world? Was Einstein a success? By 1,000 metrics, Einstein was a success. But you could also, if you read books, you'll see that he had a relatively unhappy family life, right? And you see this trade-off between family and work and accomplishments. If you're changing the world, and you're bringing the whole world along with you, it's very difficult to bring along a couple of kids with you, right? If you're trying to focus on your kids, sometimes it might be more difficult to focus on bringing the whole world with you. So what is important for you? What do you want to accomplish? And as I was saying when we spoke before, before the session started, I'm in touch with my batchmates from IIT, and we're on a WhatsApp group, and we get together every weekend. Ever since this pandemic started, we've been getting together every weekend or every other weekend on a video call, a conference call, and there may be 30, 50, 70 people, maybe 100 people on the call. We had a relatively small class of 200 and something people graduating, so up to 50% of the class is still on the call. And different people talk about their experiences and what they're passionate about. Some people talk about the environment, some people talk about farming, some people talk about photography. And every one of them, to me, is a success. The stories that they tell are stories where they've made profound differences, where they've changed people around them, they've made an impact on people's lives. And that's success. And so it isn't about ultimately making money. It's about the impact. It's about the changes that you've made. It's about how you're affecting society. And it's how you've realized that and how you've lived your life. So I think success there's no universal definition of success.
Okay, so I think we can end this with one last question. So what is your advice to all the undergraduates and basically people who are stuck during the lockdown, and how would you advise us to spend our time fruitfully?
Well, I think it's important. Obviously, there are classes, I would recommend you attend classes. That's always a good start, and do what you need to do. But look, I learned a tremendous amount when I was in IIT. With all respect to my professors, I learned probably as much, if not more, from my classmates than I did from my professors. Right? I learned from other people in the class. I learned from people in the hostel. I was in hostel 5 and 226, And I was in Hostel 5, a room which I visited recently, which looks like hasn't been painted since I left. But so I was in Hostel. I made a number of friends over the years, and I learned from them. I learned from them not just about academics, but I learned from them about becoming a better person. As I said, IIT was 5 years when I was in IIT. And I started in 1977. I was 15 years old when I started in IIT, and I graduated when I was 20, right? So for me, when I went to IIT, I was a kid. I was 15 years old. And my view of the world was shaped not just in classes. My view of the world was shaped by the people around me, right? The way I think, and I don't think the same way that I did then, but it's the methodology of thinking, the structure of learning. All of that was set in those years. And so I think it's very important for all of you to maintain those connections. And I think this community of colleagues and friends that you have, as I said, I get together with my graduating class we are together on WhatsApp, and I get together with them by video. And we're doing this years, we graduated in 1982, we're still in touch with each other, right? That maintaining that relationship and keeping that connection, I think, is going to be important. So think about not just work, but think about the social fabric of what makes you a class, and what makes you colleagues, what makes you classmates or institute mates, if you will. What brings you together? I think focus on that piece of it. And I think the other piece, and you mentioned it, I think it's important to recognize that in this time, especially when you're away from the university. And I see this in the US with many of my friends and colleagues who are professors. They are concerned about mental health in students, right? And mental health and people feeling depressed because they're by themselves and they don't have the ability to interact in the same way that they could before. And that is and I know that for many years, certainly issues and discussions of mental health have always, for some reason, have had a stigma associated with them, and that's certainly not the case. And I would encourage anyone who's feeling down, who's feeling depressed, who's feeling to reach out and get help, because it's an important aspect. So being social is an important aspect of who we are. And when you're remote from campus, make sure that you monitor yourselves. Make sure that you're emotionally in a good place. And make sure that you're physically in a good place. Like go out, work out. You may not have access to the institute's facilities. You may not have access to the gymkhana and to the weights room, and you don't have access to the swimming pool in the same way. But at least find a mechanism for you to be able to work out. So keep a regimen going and focus not only on your academic, but also on your social, also on your mental health, also on your physical health, and that makes you a better person as you come out of it. And all of those are important aspects, I think, throughout your life, but certainly as you're separated from your colleagues and your friends and the people and the experience that's so important to you, which is the undergraduate experience or the graduate experience at IIT.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So yeah, we do have some questions, but I think would it be possible for one more question?
Sure, one more question.
Okay, so we have a very important question. So how do you balance a good and informal relations with your colleagues and juniors while maintaining your authority?
As I said, authority is not something that you assert because of position, right? The most fragile form of authority is you have to do what I tell you because you work for me, right? I'm your manager and I'm going to tell you to do this and you must do it. That is the most fragile form of authority. That is something that will allow you to get something done in an immediate moment. Like right now, I want to get something done. Go do this, and you go do it. Fine. But every time you do that, imagine that you're undermining your long-term. You're undermining your long-term ability to support an individual. And to maintain your authority. So the way you balance it is you try to be a leader who is able to understand how to connect the different people in the organization, how to bring their points of view together, and how to drive cohesion across the organization. Don't try to tell people what to do, but try to lead people by focusing on on other styles of leadership than just simply being authoritarian. I don't know if that answers the question, but if you do that, you're able to make that connection. People want to work for people they like. So just because someone works for you doesn't mean that you can't be friends. But you also have to recognize that in that position as a leader, you have to make decisions. You have to give people performance reviews. You have to make decisions about individuals. So if you're at work, you're not at work to be friends. You're at work to get a job done. And the fact that you're friends is great. But you have to think about your leadership styles in the right way. But it's again a complicated mix of how to manage all of this. There's no simple answer. But you have to think about, again, the styles and what's important for you to get the job done.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that, sir. I think we are going to come to a close for this session. I thank you for taking part in this session and taking valuable time out from your very busy and hectic schedule. Also, thank all the participants for asking questions and staying with us. Once again, I say thank you to Ajei Gopal sir, and also to Tom sir, who helped us in conducting this session. And that's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your attention. Thanks so much.